Kirstie Allsopp hosts the show Location, Location, Location. In every episode, she tries to find the perfect home for a different set of buyers, and she is presumably someone with a great deal of knowledge about the property market. What she seems to lack, though, is knowledge about other people's lives. An interview with Allsopp was published in the Sunday Times, headlined, "Of course, young people can afford a home. Just move somewhere cheaper," says Kirstie Allsopp. The headline was based on these comments, which she said in the interview. So she told the Times, "I don't want to belittle those people who can't buy a home, but there are loads of people who can do it and don't. It is hard. We've fallen into the trap of saying it's impossible for everybody. I was brought up to believe owning your home is the be-all and end-all. And in a way, I still believe that. It's about where you can buy, not if you can buy. There is an issue around the desire to make those sacrifices. It is difficult. If you were born down south and have family down south, my life is down south. But if we want a family house, we have to move. If I had any roots further north and I was trying to buy, I'd do it." I don't know why Kirstie Allsopp is speaking in the first person there. She is the daughter of the 6th Baron Hindlip, an Eton-educated hereditary peer. So I would submit, even if she had an aunt in Stoke-on-Trent, she would still have been able to buy a house wherever she wanted in Britain. Allsopp did, in fact, purchase a house aged 21 with the help of her parents. That's, unsurprisingly, not something Allsopp is keen to recognise. As is often the case with the very wealthy, she conveniently ignores the hand-up she got from her family and credits her success in the housing market to personal sacrifice. She explained, "When I bought my first property, going abroad, the EasyJet, coffee, gym, Netflix lifestyle didn't exist. I used to walk to work with a sandwich, and on payday I'd go for a pizza and to a movie and buy a lipstick. Interest rates were 15%. I was earning £11,500 or £11,500 a year." Now, Kirstie, you may have been earning £11,500 a year, but your dad was a hereditary peer. And a Netflix and a gym membership wasn't the only sacrifice. Encourage the less well-off to make. She advised, "I do think you have to ask yourself what your degree is giving you. Could you get a job at 18, stay at home with your parents for 3 years and save every single penny, enough for a deposit?" That diatribe was endorsed by at least one Tory MP. Kevin Hollinrake shared the article with the caption, "Good advice."
Kirstie Allsopp's a dumbass. And I think that's kind of all there is to it. Like, her profession is talking about housing. All right. That's her job. And yet she betrays such a breathtaking ignorance of the housing market that I almost think she's one of those people who turn up at a GP surgery one day and claim to be the new village doctor. And it turns out that they're a con man and they've got absolutely no background in medicine whatsoever. Because it's hard to imagine that somebody who has decades of experience talking about the housing market could be this underinformed about what it is that's stopping people from buying. Because sure, you might have been on 11,500 and interest rates might have been 15%, but at the time that Kirstie Allsopp was buying a house, incomes and house prices were, kind of like this. Now they're absolutely like this. They have diverged hugely. And in fact, when it comes to other aspects of the cost of living, not just housing, but things like, the cost of public transport, the cost of commuting to work, energy prices that we're seeing this year, it is very expensive. Right? It's expensive to live. It's expensive to just do those basic things that you have to do in order to, keep yourself alive and be a productive worker who can bring home a paycheck. You've then got the way in which the housing market then deepens the cost of living crisis. Because housing is an asset first and foremost, before it is a home for people, it is a home for money, right? To exploit and make your money grow. You have a vicious cycle of buy-to-let landlords scooping up the housing stock and renting back to people who have not been able to save up that deposit at increasingly, extracting rates, which mean that people are less likely to be able to save up for that deposit because it's, a third to half of their salary going on housing with a decreasing rate of return for what it is that you can get for it. You then have the third thing, which is, well, why don't you just rely on the bank of mum and dad? Well, you might not have a bank of mum and dad, Kirstie. You know, some of us don't have dads who are barons, which I know might be shocking to hear. And you simply don't have the ability to go, well, I'm going to live at home cost free, thus pushing all of my living expenses onto my parents and save up every penny from this imaginary well-paid job that you can get at the age of 18 without a university degree. Again, it's pure fantasy. And then you've got the last thing, which is, well, why don't you just move somewhere cheaper? Right? Why don't you just move somewhere cheaper? Anyone with a passing familiarity of what's been going on for the last 20 years could tell you that where there are cheap houses and where there are well-paid jobs, this is not one and the same. This is not a Venn diagram with a lovely, juicy, intersecting middle. These two things are far away. We have an economy which is based on young people, in order to get any kind of well-paid job, having to go to university and accrue huge amounts of debt. That debt also has a decreasing rate of return in terms of the availability of well-paid graduate jobs. And if you want a well-paid graduate job, or the hope of having one, you're going to have to move to a big urban centre like London, like Manchester, where housing is more expensive. And then you're going to be in this predatory rental sector in order to just earn enough money to pay off this debt that you already have. You know, people aren't, shying away from places where there are cheap housing purely because, they're snooty or they're snobs. Although I do think that people should have the right to buy housing in a place where they enjoy their life the most. I also think that's reasonable and good and fine. It's because of economic necessity in no small part. Oh, yeah. And then the third thing. Or fourth thing, I've lost count. This is why I don't give financial advice, because I'm really bad at counting. The very last thing that I'm going to say about Kirstie Allsopp being a complete dumbass is even if I gave up my Netflix, I gave up a yearly holiday, I gave up coffees in the morning, if I gave up my FT subscription, if I ate gruel all year round and I saved up for a deposit and it took me 30 years to do it, because there's one bit in the interview she says, you could do this in 30 years. That assumes that the housing market is going to stay exactly where it is now for those 30 years. That's not true. In the area where I am, which is, a rapidly gentrifying area now, because people are being pushed out of the trendy bits of Hackney and, pushed up from the trendy bits of Islington. They've discovered the existence of Tottenham. There are some houses which are increasing in value by about 30 grand a year. So you can cut back on all the Netflix and Costa and EasyJet you want. In the time that it takes for you to save that money, what's going on in the housing market is increasing a hell of a lot faster. So, yes, I find it difficult to keep track of counting. I struggle to work out the difference between 3, 4, and 5 when I'm listing my points. But even this idiot has got more of a grip on what's going on in the housing market than professional housing pundit, the Honourable Kirstie Allsopp.
To their credit, the Sunday Times didn't go easy on Allsopp. So they did a sort of similar thought experiment to you, Ash, and they point out that a first-time buyer who gave up a Starbucks latte every weekday, an ordinary Netflix subscription, gym membership, and 2 return flights to Europe a year on EasyJet would save about £1,600 a year. However, if they moved into their parents' house and did not pay rent, they could save on average £7,000 a year. The average deposit for a first-time buyer is £59,000 according to Halifax. To save that, you would need to forego your Starbucks latte, Netflix subscription, gym membership, and EasyJet flights for 37 years. So I think the 30 years you were referencing there, Ash, that was actually said by the Times, not Kirstie Allsopp. But as you say, it could be more than that if you live in one of the many parts of Britain where house prices are rocketing every year. Of course, this is not to say that the Times is committed to tackling Britain's housing crisis. A brief search on their website shows advice on how to avoid capital gains tax when gifting a property to a family member. And when Labour proposed one of the few policies that could help reduce the stranglehold of landowners on our economy, the Times sister paper, The Sun, ran with digging deeper, Labour planning new garden tax, which could see council tax treble. In the article, the tax was described as devastating, but it is, of course, our politicians' obsession with rising house prices that's devastating to a generation of Britons. This analysis from property firm Schroders shows how increases in house prices have outstripped average incomes across England and Wales. As you can see, in 1999, in every region, houses cost on average between 2 and 4 times a person's annual income. By 2020, that figure had at least doubled in every region. And in London, houses went from costing 4 times an average salary to over 11 times annual earnings. Ash, as I said, the author of that Sunday Times interview, I think, did frame Kirstie Allsopp's comments in quite a cutting light. But isn't it the case that until the political establishment and the media establishment are willing to contemplate that falling house prices is actually what we need, then this is all just virtue signaling? The problem with Kirstie Allsopp is that she said something uncouth rather than that she's actually, on policy terms, these people are in agreement.
Well, I'd say she's almost fallen into the same trap as Molly May, which is because of her own personal idiocy, she has put ruling class ideology in too unrefined a way and drawn the ire of social media. Now, I don't feel particularly sorry for her because it is more annoying for everybody else to listen to her than for her to get some backlash for what it is that she said. But she is catching flack because she's revealing the system for what it is in some way, which is almost a, let them eat cake approach to the housing crisis, or rather don't eat any cake and then you'll magically get a deposit. So I do have a bit of sympathy with that. The thing that maybe I would say about falling house prices and the collective delusion that you can somehow resolve what's wrong and broken in the housing system without them is that part of why there is so much investment in an economic settlement, which sacrifices absolutely everything else in the economy in the interest of asset price inflation, is because if you are an older person, you're approaching retirement or you're at retirement age, and you're looking at a longer life because people are living longer, and you're looking towards the period of time where you might need care because of the absence of a socialized care system. What people have to fall back on in their old age is very often the value of their house, particularly if they are asset rich but cash poor. So that's part of the reason why I think you've got such, diametrically opposed interests between older voters and younger voters. Now, I'm talking about this in terms of, tendencies in the majority of each group, obviously not individuals within each group who buck the trend and vote against the movement of their generation. But that's partly why, because if you are older, it's not simply always because, you're a reactionary asshole who likes to see people suffer. The investment in keeping the value of your house rising is because really there's nothing else. That is your protection in old age. So you can't deal with the housing crisis in isolation. The housing crisis is also a crisis of care.